Today, we're going to talk about the difference between equality and efficiency. Now, these two things might seem like that they should be able to both be achieved, but unfortunately, when we seek for equality, we often have to give up efficiency. And when we seek for efficiency, we sometimes have to make a decision about equality. So to think about this, let me ask this question. How many murders is the efficient number of murders in a given year for the city of Muncie? How many murders is the efficient number of murders in 1 year in Muncie? Now you might initially think, well, 0, of course, and that would be ideal, but not efficient. What's the difference? Well, in order to have 0 murders in Muncie, I would have to put every one of you in a padded cell, so you couldn't hurt each other. It's the only way I could guarantee no murders. Of course, even then the guards might murder one of you, so then that wouldn't solve the problem. The point is, we can't always have the ideal because the cost of achieving the ideal is too great. And so what we try to find is the optimal or efficient number. So let's think for a minute about this idea of ideal versus optimal. In order to have the ideal, we would have to put whatever resources we have, including potentially all our resources, into achieving that ideal. We may not think that that's worth it, that we would have to give up everything in order to achieve one goal, for example, perfectly clean air. We could spend entire fortunes of the world tracking down one last molecule of smog. We're going through a similar situation right now with the COVID-19, where we've decided to shut down the entire economy, do all kinds of things to try to avoid the number of deaths being higher. How far do we take that? When do we decide we're going to go back to coming out of our homes and having a life? Well, at some point we have to do that. And yes, some people will die as a result, but we have to have as close as we can to an efficient decision, not an ideal decision regarding that. The calculation here is one of marginal cost versus marginal benefit. We think about the marginal cost as being, what does it cost to get one more unit of improvement? And then we think about the marginal benefit. What is the benefit of having one additional unit? And when the marginal cost is greater than the marginal benefit, we've gone too far. We need to stop. So we want to find that point where the marginal cost and the marginal benefit equal, and that's what we should be trying to target. But then we have this problem of things, for example, like how many murders is the optimal number of murders? Well, how do we achieve that? Given a choice as to how many resources to put in terms of saving a life, you might say, well, we'll just put all the resources into it. Well, this was a decision that would be very difficult to make if we don't have some value that we can place on human life. And so to achieve this, the government hires economists to try to determine what is the value of the average human life. Now remember, each individual life is priceless, obviously, to you. So if we put a priceless value on every human life, we would be using all the resources in the universe to try to save every last life. And that's not going to work. So we need an average value of human life. And what we do is we allow the average person to figure out what their life is worth themselves. For example, if you get in the car and drive to the grocery store, there's some value in getting groceries. You have to eat. But there's also a possibility you could die in a car accident on the way. And that probability is known. We know per mile on the average what the risk is to your life of driving. Yet you make that decision, whether it's to go to the grocery store or go out to a movie, whatever. And so you're determining at that point in time that your life is worth something in terms of the benefit of going to the movie and versus not, and you're running that risk. And when we calculate all the risks that people take, or some big chunk of them, and the probability of death and the value of that, for example, a job, then we can come up with a value of human life. And in the US, currently that number is around $9 million. And so let me give you an example of how we might calculate the value of human life. Let's take two people. One person is a milk truck driver in Florida, and the other is a ice road trucker driving gasoline trucks in the icy roads of Alaska. Obviously, there is greater risk to life driving an ice road truck than a milk truck in Florida. And so the person who drives the ice road trucks in Alaska is paid a higher wage. Now, adjusting for the local wage differences and then looking at the difference in wage, plus the probability of dying if you drive an ice road truck versus driving a milk truck, then we could determine that that person is willing to accept a higher wage based on that probability. We multiply that probability times the higher wage, and we come up with a value of human life. Now, you might say, well, then what about the value of a human life in another country? The published value of a human life in China was $25,000. Now, some economists at the same time did our form of a calculation for the value of human life in China and found it to be $42,000. So in other words, the average person in China believed their lives to be worth $42,000, while the government was computing it to be $25,000. So we have different values and so forth that are part of this. I've explained this to some of my students from China, and they've been a little disappointed to think that they put that low value on their lives, but you know, we have different values in different countries. How much are we willing to sacrifice for equality? Equality is a nice thing. Let's talk about equality versus efficiency in this class. Let's suppose that I'm offering a class like this one, and I say to the students, in this class, everybody gets a B minus, or everybody gets a C plus. No matter what you do, you're going to get a C plus in my class because we're trying to achieve equality. Now, in another class that I teach, I say to the students, hey, you have to perform, and based on your performance, you will get a grade anywhere between an A and an F, and your performance will determine what kind of a grade that you achieve. Well, in one class, we're looking for an efficient result, and in one class, we're looking for an equal result. What will be the difference in terms of incentives? Think about that from an economic standpoint. What are the differences in incentives, and how will people respond in those two situations? Well, from what I understand, most students who think that they're going to get better than a B minus or better than a C plus are not going to want to take the one class because they're going to work really hard to still get a B minus or a C plus. On the other hand, the students who normally get, a C or a D are thinking, hey, I'll take that class. I don't have to do any work at all, and I get a C plus or a B minus. That's fantastic. So then what kind of students do I have in these classes? In one class, I have a bunch of students who are D and F students, and in the other class, I have all my A students working to get the best grades. Now, if you're going to take my class and you're a D or an F student, and you're going to get a C plus or a B minus no matter what, how much work are you going to put in? How much are you going to learn from that class? Well, probably nothing. In fact, I would suspect nobody's going to show up to class every day. The class will be empty. And so we have to make these decisions based on what kind of results do we want and what is the cost.